It's often said that faith or spirituality is just as valid as science, but exists in different realms of utility, and the two cannot mix. And at first, that sounds just crazy enough to work. It explains well why science fails to validate religious claims, and yet religious claims continue to persist. The biggest evidence for the alleged truthiness of religion has been its persistence. It survived, so it must be true. But we are a society well aware that not only do lies travel fast, but they're often built to outlast. The evolution of the social sciences provided an honest view of history and power dynamics that supported the spread of falsehoods. But beyond that, there's actually another problem with this claim. While we cannot apparently test the claims of spirituality with science, now that we know the character of the claim, separate but equal, we can find a comparison or two. In today's conversation, we're going to end the debate once and for all and demonstrate that faith has not earned a seat at the table. People often try to smooth over the tension between faith and science with the simple phrase, they're both valid, they just exist in different realms. On the surface, that sounds clever enough to be true. It explains why scientific tests never confirm miracles, yet faith still has millions of followers. It allows the believer to say, of course, science can't prove God. It's not supposed to. And for a moment, that truce feels tidy, like the perfect compromise. Science handles the material world, faith handles the spiritual world, whatever that is. Part of what makes this claim appealing is that it buys peace. It gives both sides a way to stop fighting without either side admitting defeat. It reassures the believer that their faith hasn't been made obsolete by discovery or technology, and it reassures the scientist that they won't be forced into a debate about angels, demons, or prayer. It's like everyone gets to keep their own sandbox, no questions asked. But here's the catch. Neat compromises like this usually hide bigger problems, because if we actually take this claim seriously, if we grant that faith and science are both valid, but in different realms, then we have to ask what validity even means. Science proves its validity by producing results: medicine that heals, technology that works, knowledge that predicts. So, what about faith? If it is valid in its own realm, then surely it should be able to prove itself by its own standards in its own context. That's where things start to unravel. One of the most common defenses of religion is this: it must be true, otherwise, it wouldn't have survived this long. Survival gets treated like proof, but persistence has never equaled proof. History is full of examples where false ideas not only endured, but shaped entire civilizations. Lies don't just stumble forward by accident, they're engineered to outlast. That's where the social sciences change the game. Before sociology, psychology, and anthropology, people assumed survival meant divine favor. But social sciences pulled back the curtain and showed the mechanisms. Sociology revealed how institutions and power structures protect beliefs. Churches didn't just nurture faith, they enforced it, tied it to law, family, and cultural identity. A falsehood attached to belonging doesn't just survive, it becomes sacred. Psychology exposed the mental levers: confirmation bias, authority bias, groupthink. These aren't random quirks, they're patterns that make humans cling tighter to beliefs the more those beliefs are challenged. That stickiness explains why faith persists despite endless contradictions. Anthropology showed how myths and rituals provided cohesion. Religion wasn't true, but it functioned, cementing alliances, justifying hierarchies, easing fear of death. The story's survival wasn't evidence of its truth, but of its utility. So when someone points to the persistence of faith as proof, the social sciences answer back. Survival proves nothing more than adaptability and utility. It doesn't validate the claims of religion, it explains them away. Persistence is not the receipt of truth, it's the receipt of power, psychology, and culture doing their work. But let's not stop here. Let's actually highlight the character of the claim itself: separate but equal. At the heart of this whole argument, faith and science are valid in different realms, is a very familiar logic. It's the logic of separate but equal. We've heard that phrase before. It was the rallying cry of segregation, a way to paper over injustice with the language of fairness. Separate but equal was never equal in practice. It was a cover, a rhetorical dodge, a way to claim dignity while denying it. That's the same sleight of hand happening here. Faith and science are said to live in different neighborhoods, each with its own rules. Faith gets mystery and morality, science gets atoms and galaxies. On paper, they're presented as equals, but in practice, the balance collapses. Science proves itself by building things that work, by curing diseases, by predicting the weather, by lighting up cities. Faith, on the other hand, promises comfort, safety, and protection. But when tested in its own realm, it doesn't deliver. The separate but equal claim masks the inequality. It allows faith to keep its status without facing accountability. So when someone says faith and science are both valid in their own ways, what they're really saying is let's protect faith from scrutiny by giving it an honorary title of equality. It sounds polite, but it's not honest, it's not equal, it's not even separate because faith keeps trying to cross the border, making claims about creation, about healing, about morality, humanity, and even truth itself. Separate but equal wasn't true in society, and it isn't true in knowledge. Think of faith like currency. The way defenders of this claim present it, it's almost as if faith and science are like the dollar and the yen. Each one is perfectly valid in its own system. The dollar buys you goods in the US, the yen buys you goods in Japan. Neither one is counterfeit. They just aren't interchangeable. You can't take your dollars into a Tokyo corner store and expect to buy sushi with them. But that doesn't make the dollar invalid. It just means it belongs to a different system. That's the way people frame faith. Science has its systems of measurements, experiments, and peer review, and faith has its system of prayer, revelation, and spiritual insight, whatever that is. And just like currency, you can't expect one system to work in the other's domain. Sounds natural. On the surface, that makes sense. It's a tidy defense. Faith is valid in its own realm, even if you can't trade it in the marketplace of science. But here's the problem with currency, both systems are real. The dollar actually buys things in the US, the yen actually buys things in Japan. They are both backed by something: governments, banks, economies, social trust. Faith claims to work in its own system. It promises peace, safety, protection, and meaning. But when you actually try to spend it, even in its own shops, the bills bounce. That's a rubber ducky. And that's where the analogy collapses. Here's the fatal flaw in the analogy: real currency actually works. It may not work in my realm, but it will work in yours. The yen buys goods in Japan, the dollar buys goods in the United States, and both are backed by systems that guarantee their value: governments, banks, economies, entire infrastructure of trust and enforcement. That's what makes them valid. They aren't just paper, they're backed by something that ensures that they spend. Faith doesn't pass that test. It claims to be its own kind of currency, valid in its own realm, but when you actually try to spend it, it doesn't deliver. You hand over faith for protection, and kids are still harmed. You hand over faith for healing, and the sick still die. You hand over faith for justice, and oppression marches on. The bills look convincing. They've been circulating for centuries. People trade them in, pass them down, even hoard them. But when you test them against reality, even in the very reality they claim to govern, they collapse. If faith is a currency, it's not the yen to science's dollar. It's counterfeit. It looks real. It changes hands easily, but it can't buy what it promises. And the moment you demand proof of purchase, the illusion shatters. If faith were truly its own valid currency, then it should at least spend in the places it claims to matter most. And history has given us no shortage of moments to test that. Take the protection of children. Faith promises safety under God's watchful eye. Yet, generation after generation, we've uncovered systemic abuse inside the very institutions that claim divine authority and favor. The bills were handed over, but they did not buy protection. Or look at slavery. Hello. Faith didn't prevent it, and it certainly didn't abolish it. In fact, it provided the justifications, the sermons, the so-called divine endorsements that kept human beings in chains. Faith provided the prescription. If faith were a valid currency, that was the moment for it to spin. Instead, it paid the oppressor's wages. And consider women in abusive homes. Faith was supposed to safeguard the sanctity of marriage, but what did it do? It preached submission, it counseled silence, and it kept women trapped in cycles of violence by calling endurance a virtue. Here again, when faith's currency should have bought safety and dignity, it purchased nothing. These weren't just fringe cases. These were the crises where faith should have proven its worth on its own terms: peace, justice, protection, and human flourishing. And each time, the bills bounced. Not only did faith fail to deliver, it was often complicit in the very harm it claimed to protect people from. The truth is, faith's currency doesn't just collapse under scrutiny, it collapsed under the weight of its own promises. So let's reframe the analogy one last time. Faith isn't the yen to science's dollar. It's not a different currency with its own marketplace where it quietly does its job. If anything, it's monopoly money. Colorful, persistent, even fun to play with in the right setting. But the moment you try to spend it on something real, the illusion falls apart. And yet it keeps circulating. People hand it down, institutions print it in bulk, and whole societies treat it as if it has value. But that persistence isn't proof of truth. It's just what happens when a counterfeit is mass produced and protected by systems invested in keeping it alive. Faith survives not because it works, but because it gets passed from hand to hand in a game we've all been told is serious. The problem is, once you step outside the game and try to spin it in the real world, on safety, on justice, on a little bit of peace, on protection, it buys you nothing. That's not a different realm. That's a bad deal. There's one more layer to this whole defense that rarely gets named. The people who argue that faith is a valid way to pursue answers are, by definition, not actually pursuing answers at all. Science begins with questions and works toward answers, slowly, carefully, often with false starts. Faith begins with the claim that the answers are already known, even when the people repeating them have never investigated a thing for themselves. They inherit conclusions, they memorize dogma, they rehearse certainties, and then call that a different way of knowing. But there's no pursuit in that. There's no discovery. There's no investigation. It's not another route to answers. It's a refusal of the question altogether. It's a pretense, a costume of knowledge. The realm of faith presents itself as a place where answers are found, but in reality, it's a place where answers are assumed, handed down, untested, and guarded from challenge. That's the real disingenuousness. Not just that the bills are counterfeit, but that the shopkeepers of faith pretend to be in the business of trade at all. They aren't. They're pretending to sell something they never had while insisting you accept it as real currency. When I think about what community is, when I think about what the church was for many people, I think about community as a service. I know so many people right now whose passion was media, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't be able to pursue that passion. I know so many people whose passion is music, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't have a place to practice that passion. I know people whose passion is communication and finding ways to inspire and motivate other people. And if it weren't for their churches, church shouldn't be the only place that meets those needs. It shouldn't be the only place that nurtures our gifts, platforms our voices, and empowers our living. That's why Bridge City Global is building community and creating the space to help you keep rising. Join us October 25th or the 26th in Venice or San Diego, your choice. Our local Bridge City community is having their initial liftoff weekend. And as a way of celebrating, we're hosting our very first Rise event. This is for you. We're about to shed the weight of limiting beliefs and open ourselves to clarity, purpose, and possibility. Through powerful voices and intentional community, you'll not only rediscover your own strength, but also the belonging that comes when we choose to rise side by side. And for those interested in being a part of this global community, go ahead and tap in now. And you may get an invite to our Friday evening and Sunday morning activities while you're in Cali. Don't miss this moment. Add Liftoff Weekend to your calendar and be ready to rise. Register now.
Take another shot at me. Take another shot.
Thank you for hanging out with me today. As you all know, I am an advocate unapologetically for building community beyond superstition. And it's actually happening in two cities in Southern California right now, Los Angeles and San Diego. Who would have thought it? Now, as you know, I'll be there in October for an entire weekend of team building and events, and I talk about that enough. You can find those links in the description. As excited as I am about the events, and I'm incredibly motivated by the conversations that have started developing around the core team. I'm excited about the structure we're looking at building to bring us all together, even while being scattered across the globe. I want to make two special requests today because as we make these structural changes and additions, it's going to position us as a community to make a tangible difference everywhere. So, my request number one, if you haven't tapped in yet and you're passionate about leading or hosting community, we're getting ready to turn up the heat and you're going to want to be in on some of these upcoming calls. And number two, this is officially real. In order to support projects like campus launches, community cleanups, safe havens, trainings, you name it, we're going to need consistent support. If you have 99 problems and money isn't one of them, I want you to consider becoming a regular partner with our work so that we can close the gap between where we are and where we need to be for communities to thrive. You can use the links in the description to start supporting today and shoot me an email to let me know how we earned your support. We're getting ready to invest in a new platform that's going to bring us all together, and we're going to need your help to make it happen. Thank you all for hanging out with me today and tolerating my brief commercial break. I'm excited about what's happening, and I don't want you to miss out on making history. That's all for today. Until next time, keep rising.